Everybody, we've now closed our business meeting and are opening up the training session for this year's annual meeting. So few housekeeping things for those that have joined us more recently. We have everyone on mute if they are in attendee status. And so there is an interactive chat that both we will be checking for questions and answers throughout the presentations. There are CCA credits available to attendees, and those we have a slide that is present in Erica Goodman's presentation at the end. And so if you stay tuned for all three presentations, there'll be a slide where you are able to get your CCA credits for this training. So we have two folks slated for our introduction, welcome and introduction portion today. We're gonna start off with Claire Lindahl. She's the CEO of the National Soil and Water Conservation Society. In that role, she's in charge of public affairs, program development, governance, and special projects. And she started this role in 2017, though she has a very rich background of conservation in the Midwest. Had the pleasure of meeting Claire a few times at the international meetings, and we welcome her to be with us today for our meeting. So Claire, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Nicole. Can everybody hear me? Just give me a wave that I'm coming through good. Okay, perfect, wonderful. And yes, I'm in charge of all those things, but I'm a nonprofit leader, so don't let anybody fool you when name tags need to be stuffed before conference. I'm around that table too. We all know how conservation works, and so it's sometimes all hands on deck. So good morning and welcome. I wanted to just start off by thanking the Empire chapter of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, thanking all of you who joined today for the resilience during this time to continue to convene and to continue this great conservation work that you are all doing. And today what I wanted to do was just reflect for a moment on the last year. And importantly, to look at the year ahead. I think it's something we all find ourselves doing around this time of year, and I think it's a healthy thing to do, to pause, to take stock, to celebrate accomplishments, and then to set some intentions for the coming year. And so as an organization, SWCS is coming off of its 75th anniversary. So 75 years of advancing conservation. And we do that through advocacy, special projects, our scientific journal, education and events. And all of this is done not just at the national level, but locally, because we know all natural resource and conservation work is locally driven. And so we've been doing this for 75 years. And as we celebrated this over the last year, we didn't look to just celebrate the valuable role conservation professionals have played in the conservation movement, but we also used this point in time to dig into what this history means to the future of the movement and the future of the profession. So as we dug in and we archived the history, we discovered, we shared, and we really asked ourselves, what does this mean for the future of our organization, the future of SWCS, and the future of the conservation professional? And so with this incredible body of historical knowledge, we learned that the world has changed a lot in the last 75 years. Goodness, I think we can just say that the world has changed a lot in the last year. And so would our profession and those that practice it. And we really had this watershed moment internally, this sort of reckoning, realizing that SWCS too must change. If we're going to continue to cultivate an organization of informed, dynamic individuals whose contributions create this bright future for ag, for the environment, and for society over this next 75 years, as we have over this past 75 years. You know, I will say that no matter how deep we dug, we found one thing had not changed in those last 75 years, and it's that the community of conservation professionals who work tirelessly to understand, to protect, to improve our natural resources, that's what this is at the center of the conservation movement now, just as they were at the center of the movement 75 years ago. And research today continues to reiterate that, to reinforce that. An article I read in 2019 by Morris and Arbuckle said that interaction with a conservation professional was the most consistent predictor of practice adoption. And so the work that you all are doing has always been important, and it remains critical. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you all of that. You are very well aware of that, but it's such an honor to be the CEO, entering my 4th year as the CEO of the society at this moment in time. But I'll say I'm even more proud to be going on nearly a decade of membership with SWCS and 5 years of leadership with my local SWCS chapter. I am still on the board of my chapter in my state. And I've done that, and I still do that because I feel being engaged in SWCS has made me a better conservation professional. It has made me happier. It's and we found that we did some listening sessions with members in 2016 that they felt that way too. They reinforced over and over again that as members, they felt better connected. They felt better able to succeed at work, better access to resources. And so naturally, I encourage you to join SWCS if you're not currently a member. Of course, I do that because this is my job as a leader of a membership association. And what leader would I be if I didn't invite you to join us? But I also do this because I've experienced those benefits firsthand of being a member. And I want others to have that same experience, to have that same camaraderie, and to have that same support. So as we look forward to the coming year, I want to just touch on 3 items. One, sort of hearkening back to that need to evolve as the profession and the professionals have and will continue to do. And so we're looking forward to going to great lengths in the coming year to understanding the needs of today's conservation professionals. And we are embarking on a strategic organizational development project, sort of like a strategic planning process, but I've been very careful to not call this a strategic plan because I wanted to challenge ourselves, our staff, our board, and our consultant to look at this process as something new and innovative and different. And so we have our first meeting, kickoff meeting this week. We anticipate having some outcomes in July. And as part of that effort, we're going to be conducting market research and analysis on our profession, on associations. We're going to be holding listening sessions, interviews. Expect to get a survey. We'll be surveying existing members. We'll be surveying lapsed members. We'll be surveying potential members, chapter leaders, partners. And we want to really work towards, quite simply, developing a better understanding of what you need from us and how we can provide it. And what's changed, what's new. One book I'm reading is calling it those sort of pain points at work. What are those points at work where you really need a quick resource or a quick mentor or a quick expert? And how can we be filling those gaps for you? Because that's what we need to do to make your work easier. 2, we continue to be focused on implementing special projects. And those special projects are on the ground conservation projects where we're actually implementing and going through the process of installing conservation practices. And those connect us to the on-the-ground conservation community. We will continue to assess the needs of conservation professionals. We'll seek to serve and broaden that community. We know that it used to be that it was, NRCS and districts and extension were the only people in the conservation game 75 years ago. And now we have this plethora of partners. And so how can we facilitate and bridge those relationships for everyone in the field? And our goal is to really enhance, adapt, and streamline conservation for wider adoption, to listen to you and to get those changes made that you need made to get more practices on the ground, to better study practices, to better promote sustainability and conservation work in your positions. And then the third thing I will touch on, you know, I had a list of 10, but I thought I better whittle it down because I'm not the all-day speaker. But we will again host a virtual conference. We will embrace the opportunities of a virtual event, the inclusivity that provides, the broader engagement that provides. That will be at the end of July. We are accepting presentations through February 17th. You know, I would say I was so proud of the staff and how they transitioned our event to virtual. We used an incredibly engaging platform, and we had such great response from the organizations that participated. We ended up having to hold a webinar on how we did our conference because we could not field all of the questions and you know, information people wanted from us on how we did it. And so it's not like another Zoom meeting. It's a different sort of experience. And there's socials, there's networking, and there's you know, a chance to share your work throughout the globe. And as we look to maybe, you know, get back into person in 2022, we want to use this last year to really capitalize on that opportunity. So please look into that and consider joining us. You know, in closing, I just want to say that just like the conservation professionals we serve over the next year, we're going to use data to employ our strategy. We're going to develop a bold implementation plan for evolution. And we're going to provide greater services to our members and our local chapters and the constituencies that they serve. That's a hard word, wasn't it? And we will find innovative ways to continue to share success in research to be emulated in the field. I know that when I worked in the field, there were few ideas that I didn't steal from somebody else. And so that's the beauty of our conservation work, is that we all want everyone to succeed across the nation. That's the commonality of conservation. Despite that, it's all very localized. There are lessons that we can take from one another, from New York to Iowa to California. And so we will continue to find ways for you to share success and research and learn from one another. And we will amplify the voice of the conservation professional. We will take the voices from the field to the desks of leadership. We will seek diverse voices as we do this. We are actively listening, we are engaging in dialogue, and we are thinking critical. And we want to take meaningful action toward creating institutions and systems that serve and value people equally. And, you know, we'll do all of this with the knowledge of our past, those past 75 years. And we do that for today's conservation professional and for the natural resources that are integral to our future. So I just want to end again by thanking you all. The work you do is so important, and it's equally challenging. We will always seek to understand those challenges and create ways to help you overcome them. So please join us, engage with us in the next year, and help us shape the next 75 years of the society, the profession, and of the movement. I will stick around for a few minutes. I have to hop off for another meeting as life goes, but I would just end by saying too, I am very accessible. Nicole has all of my information, and I welcome anyone reaching out to me about a potential project, a partnership, a question, anything. Sometime you want to see the view of the Des Moines River, just Zoom call me, and we can connect. And those are the best moments, and those are my best learning moments, is when I can connect with conservation professionals. So I will mute. Thank you so much for having me, and have a wonderful meeting and a wonderful rest of your day.
Claire, thank you so much. I feel like I just want to bottle all of that energy, and whenever we have an experience of, you know, maybe a Wednesday slump or something like that, to remember why we are here. Just to touch on some high points that you captured, I love that talking about so much has changed in 75 years, but the community of conservationists has not. And just that culture of sharing is just so important. And I have to echo, she is super approachable. I've ran into Claire at these international meetings, and it doesn't matter, you know, at the time I was an entry-level soil conservationist, and I could go up to her and she was available. So thank you for your spark of energy and for being present here today. Sean, are there any questions for Claire in the chat box right now?
Nothing in the chat. And
Okay.
besides the message that I left about if you were interested in joining the Empire State Chapter or finding out more about the benefits of the society, I left a link there. Feel free to click, guys. Yeah,
check it out. I mean, as soon as I started my career in conservation, because someone that I respected at a conservation district told me the values of joining the Soil and Water Conservation Society. And I personally have experienced the benefits of joining, both in terms of, community, sharing ideas, remaining technically sound, and also just staying inspired. That is so important. Particularly, we've all faced challenges this past year. We're in a different operational status. In some capacities, we're isolated. There might be financial stressors, but man, having this society really helps to stay inspired. So thank you so much. Please click on the link that Sean posted in the chat just to check us out. And we are all available to answer any questions about how our society might benefit you. Last thing I'll add, if you are a member, you'll be hearing from us in the Empire chapter this year. We want to, we've talked about some of the things that Claire talked about. We want to know how we can better service you. We've started to reach out to conservation districts and see how we could fill those gaps. And so both on the national level and with our chapter, we're looking to help you all in your jobs. So thank you again, Claire. We have our next speaker for our introduction lined up. We have the honor and privilege of having Blake Glover, State Conservationist of NRCS New York, on the line. Welcome, Blake. I know you have a busy schedule, so thanks for carving out this time to meet with us today.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'll just piggyback on to what Ms. Lindahl said, that's 75 years of change, right? From technology to anything has been changed in 75 years. And just on the call today, when I hopped on about 9:43, there was change today. Heath Heisel had passed the gavel over to Nicole Kabisky to move forward this organization in a positive direction that Heath had. And that just means a lot for all of the folks that are on board today in a conservation effort, not only from an NRCS standpoint, but from the universities to American Farmland Trust, other partners that are on today, SWCDs. We all have a passion to provide conservation and learn, right? That's what we're here today, is to learn, but not only learn and bottle it up, we have to pass that on. We don't have to pass it on to just the next generation, but there are producers out there across this state that are waiting for us to, after this meeting, something you have learned, to pass that on to somebody else, to make their life just a little bit better, make their operations a little bit better. That's what they're waiting on from this group and from others that need to be a part of this group. That's what they're waiting on. And so I challenge you today that something you have learned, pass that on. Pass that on to those folks that are waiting for that next bit of information that may just make their life a little bit easier. Especially if we're going to talk about change, we can talk about, 2020, 2021. I mean, we've only been doing this for a couple of weeks, right? And 2021 seems to be starting out like 2020, but we'll get there. And, with change, there's a new administration from an NRCS standpoint. There's a new administration coming in. We will receive our budget for NRCS, our initial budget here soon. And that will provide us an opportunity to make some decisions that will benefit not just the agency, but NRCS and ultimately those producers around the state. And I'll just end with this, guys. We have a long ways to go, and we're a part of the fight. 75 years with this organization and over 80 some years with NRCS existence. We have a long ways to go in the conservation fight around the country. Don't be discouraged. Continue to learn, continue to pass along your information, and continue to work together. Because without a group as this, with all the different entities involved, there is no benefit for us being in our own silo, for us only doing and trying to do something by ourselves anymore. Those days are over. And we have to start working together as a group, from the SWCDs to NRCS to the Association of Conservation Districts to the Employees Association to Cornell to Farmland Trust to any other entity that's on today. We have to start working together for the common goal of conservation and ultimately the success of farming and ag industry around the country. If we don't do that, we are selling ourselves short as an agency and as a corporation of entities within a corporation. We are selling ourselves short. So I ask that you pass that information on today, along with, continue to bring folks into the fold. I think that was mentioned earlier. Continue to bring the folks into the fold. The folks that are on today, when we hold these meetings, a lot of times we are preaching to the choir. And we got to get some folks within these meetings that we haven't touched before, haven't been involved in what we're trying to do as a group. And that's only going to benefit everybody involved and everybody, producers around the state and country. So with that, guys, just like Claire had just said, I am double booked. I have a 10 o'clock that I'm late for, but I will stay on a little bit if there's questions or concerns that I may be able to address. But I appreciate the opportunity today to be involved in an introduction, and it looks like a great training ahead. So with that, Nicole, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Blake, and thank you for being with us. And I guess I'll just say challenge accepted, to take this information and make sure that we pass it along. And if all of us in this meeting do that, that's very impactful. Do we have any questions for Blake before he hops offline? Sean, are you seeing anything yet in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. Well, Blake, thank you so much for being on with us, and I just love the getting out of our silos, because together we are so much greater than the sum of our parts individually. When it comes to us as individuals, as conservation partners, and really that's how we leverage all of our strengths and get to that finish line. And you know what? Push the finish line farther. See if we can go a little farther. So I love that. So let's see here. We're a little ahead of schedule, but you know what? We have 3 really awesome presentations ahead. So if there's no questions for Claire or Blake at this time, I think we'll just jump into the presentations. That's all right. That way we have more time for Q&A interspersed throughout. I will do a couple more housekeeping things for folks that might have joined on the line more recently. So first of all, everyone that's an attendee status is on mute. So if you have a question, a comment, please put something in the chat box. There are CCA credits, certified crop advisor credits available for the training today. That will be embedded into the last slide of Erica Goodman's presentation. So we have those credits available for folks to sign, to get credit for the presentations and the training today. With that, I'm gonna switch it over and introduce Joseph. So our first presenter for the day is Joseph Amsili. He is a soil health program coordinator with the Cornell Soil Health Team and New York Soil Health Initiative. He works to coordinate and support soil health extension activities across New York State, including the Soil Health Center at Empire Farm Days and the New York Soil Health Specialist Training in collaboration with American Farmland Trust. Joseph today will be sharing the results from the recently finished report that characterized New York soil health by soil texture and cropping system. So Joseph, we welcome you to the program today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Let me just get my screen set up. It's great to be here with everyone and really impressive to see how many people turned out for this, and nice to start 2020 on a cheery, positive note. So with that, yeah, I'm really excited to share this characterization effort that we undertook the last couple of years to understand how a range of biological, physical, and chemical soil health parameters is affected by both texture and cropping system. So that's what we're here to talk about. And I just want to make you familiar with what the covers of these reports look like. I've dropped the links for both the summary and technical report in the chat box. The summary is like a quick and kind of a nice one to look at, 12 pages, and the technical has a serious amount of tables and graphs if you're interested in all the details. And of course, it's important to acknowledge the funding for this project came from the New York Soil Health Initiative, which is funded by New York State Environmental Protection Fund, which is administered by New York Department of Ag and Markets. So although I am giving this talk to a bunch of Soil Water Conservation District, NRCS employees, it's always good to go back to the fundamentals. Soils have inherent and dynamic soil quality. Inherent soil quality is the result of location's unique combination of minerals, climate, biology, relief, and time. And this creates conditions that inherent properties that we can't change, like soil texture, depth of a soil, whether there's a fragipan, like in the southern tier of New York, our soil's parent material has low amounts of limestone, tends to have a fragipan, so it makes those soils not very compatible with annual grain production or processing vegetables, and we end up having a lot of hay production or pasture. Whereas these dynamic soil qualities are these changes due to human use and management, things that humans can change about the soil, like soil organic matter, soil structure changes. When we're talking about soil health, we're focusing more on the dynamic and anthropogenic aspect of soil quality. So we all recognize soil health's importance through two channels, both through the food and nutrition we receive from agricultural systems, but also the ecosystem services that soils provide in terms of purifying water, sequestering carbon, et cetera, partitioning water that lands on the surface and allowing it to infiltrate. But what's, I guess, maybe less recognized or becoming bringing more excitement to soils is the tremendous capacity that humans have to alter the soil. So this renewed interest in soil health is both driven by a renewed recognition of soil as a critical natural resource as we become more concerned with sustainable food production, water quality concerns, ecosystem concerns, and definitely climate concerns. And our understanding of these increasing anthropogenic impacts on soils, and on the flip side, the amount of capacity that humans can be both a positive and degrading force on a landscape. For example, in North America, potentially lost about 50% of soil organic matter since agriculture started in this country. And those increasing anthropogenic inputs, when we looked at those cropping system and texture's effect on soil health, we found that these inherent properties in our cropping systems shape our soil health about equally. So our anthropogenic impacts have strong impacts on the soil. A little background about soil health at Cornell. We've been doing this for quite a long time. In 2000, a bunch of soil biologists, interdisciplinary group got together to begin thinking about how we could begin testing more of the biological and physical realm of the soil to get a more holistic picture of soil functioning. They tested a huge number of indicators, and in 2006 they started rolling out this lab service. And on the right you can see what the current iteration of that looks like, the standard report, where the values are interpreted based on a very big database of Midwest, Northeast, and Mid-Atlantic samples. And really this report that I'm going to talk about today focuses on some of these 13,000 samples that have been processed by the lab in the last 6 years. And we're excited to be part of this national, international movement and helping inform ways that we can test and interpret soil health. So let's get down to the report. Between 2014 and 2018, we had about 1,456 samples processed by the lab from across the state. We removed some urban samples. We don't have any samples from New York City in the database, and we've removed a bunch of urban and kind of backyard garden type samples because we wanted to have this report be more useful in an agricultural context. So you can see, yes, composite 0 to 6 inch samples, and what that pretty good distribution across the state, definitely some areas with bigger projects than others, but pretty good distribution. And the indicators we're going to focus on today, we also have a treatment of the chemical indicators in the technical report, but I'm not going to talk about that today. But today we're going to talk about the effects of texture and cropping system on available water capacity, the quantity of plant available water a soil can store, aggregate stability, a measure of how well soil aggregates resist disintegration upon wetting, which is really important and relates to functions related to erosion, infiltration, etc. And then the other two physical indicators are surface and subsurface compaction. And these are the only two that are actually measured in the field with the penetrometer in field moist conditions. And for the biological, we have total soil organic matter, active carbon, measure of a much smaller and easily decomposable fraction of organic matter, soil protein, which is the dominant nitrogen-rich organic compound in the soil. So it gives us an indicator of how big our nitrogen-rich pool is, and soil respiration, an indicator of microbial activity. So characterization of soil health, basically you can think about this report as understanding soil health parameters from an inherent perspective. Soil texture is probably the most important, and defining inherent soil property that shapes how a soil transmits water, how a soil holds on to water, how much organic matter a soil can hold on to, etc. And this is an inherent property we can't change, but we know it has huge effects on the range of these different indicators. So in this report, we looked at 4 soil texture groups: coarse, loam, silt loam, and fine. And you can see the distribution. We have a lot of loamier soil textures in our most productive band of alpha sols in the state. We have some more coarser textured soils in Long Island and in Hudson Valley and up around Lake Ontario. And we know, so available water capacity is very strongly affected by soil texture. probably the most strongly influenced by soil texture of all the indicators we measure. And this probably looks pretty familiar to you from a Brady and Wild textbook. This is actually with our data, but you'd see the same thing in the soils textbook. So we know that the percentage of sand, silt, and clay really strongly influences the quantity of plant available water that a soil can store, and silt loams tend to store the most. These silty clay loams are very similar to silt loam in texture that we have. So yeah, and so we know that organic matter management for managing available water capacity is much more important in the coarse textured area of soil texture. And we've also known for a long time that soil organic matter is really strongly influenced by soil texture. Finer textured soils store more soil organic matter, reactive organic carbon or active carbon, and are more biologically active than coarse textured soils. And we've known this for a really long time with organic matter, that fine and finer textured soils with more fine silt and clay tend to be able to hold more soil organic matter than coarse textured soils. The reason is these very fine silt and clay particles have more surface area to stabilize the organic matter against decomposition compared to coarse textured soils. So a medium, a pretty average organic matter for coarse textured soil, let's say, is 2.4, but we know for a silt loam that'd be really low. So this texture information is really important for interpreting whether organic matter is low or high for a specific soil. And what is more new in this report is having this information for some of these more sensitive indicators for soil health, active carbon, and respiration as well. And the other question we looked at, which hasn't really been done to this extent in this state, and probably for a lot of other states, this is a pretty unique database that's been really fun to work with. We wanted to get at how do cropping systems, which is the management, that's the human part, impact soil health. So we looked at 5 different cropping systems. And when each sample comes to the lab, similar to when people submit to Dairy 1, you put the current crop, this year's crop code and the last 2 years' crop codes. So basically we group those strategically into different cropping systems. The annual grain consisted of corn grain, soybeans, wheat. Dairy consisted of corn silage and alfalfa crop codes. Pasture, different pasture crop codes. Mixed vegetable, which is basically a diverse array of vegetables on a probably smaller piece of land, which was really important because we wanted to have a contrast between these very big processing vegetable operations where you're growing acres and acres of cabbage or acres and acres of snap beans, and compared to that mixed vegetable, because the smaller, there's much more capacity for a farmer to change the soil health of, say, 5 acres versus 100 acres. So that's really important to capture. And you can see in this map, our most productive soils in our alpha sols from Buffalo to Albany have a lot of our annual grain and processing vegetables in central and western New York. More vegetables in Hudson Valley, Suffolk, and Long Island, central New York, and a lot of dairy in northern New York as well as western New York. So why is this important? The effects of cropping systems on soil health and understanding that is because it's really about the different types of carbon and nutrient cycling regimes, tillage regimes that are within these different systems. So for pasture, you could think of a pasture system. About 100% of the above ground biomass is being returned to the soil every year. And there's no disturbance through tillage. So we're preserving the soil organic matter in the soil. giving life in the soil a lot of organic matter to consume. And on the other side, we have soils and systems that we're asking a lot from the soil, annual grain systems, processing vegetable systems, where we're maybe harvesting 50 to 70% of the above ground residue, returning the remainder. And a lot of these systems, potentially we're maybe returning the nutrients to the soil, but we're not returning that organic matter that's lost from the soil. We also have different losses from tillage, oxidizing soil organic matter, and potentially if the soil's not covered, we're losing a lot of soil through erosion, which is the most nutrient-rich topsoil. And intermediate to these two systems, you can think of dairy cropping systems, which a lot of times have a more sustainable rotation, where they have maybe 3 years of corn silage and then 3 years of alfalfa. So they're giving a good amount of time to rest with perennials. They may also be importing feed onto the farm, so they might have a net import of carbon and nutrients onto the farm, so they're able to maintain some soil health that way. With the mixed vegetable type operations, those tend to be smaller operations, sometimes organic. So there's a lot of composting and cover crops to maintain soil health. So let's start going by these individual indicators by cropping system. And you can see that we're only looking at soil organic matter across cropping systems for loam textured soils, because we want to separate the effects of texture and cropping system. So here you can see that the pastures and the mixed vegetable systems maintain the highest amounts of soil organic matter, dairy cropping intermediate, and the annual grain and processing vegetable have the lowest amount of soil organic matter. For active carbon, a similar picture, pasture, dairy crop, and mixed vegetable have higher amounts of easily decomposable organic matter than annual grain or processing vegetable operations. Soil protein, a similar picture. Pastures and mixed vegetables have a larger pool of protein in the soil, which is that slow release of soil organic nitrogen that's released as microbes mineralize the protein in the soil and soil organic nitrogen. The soil respiration, a very strong signature from pastures having the highest microbial respiration when that soil is brought into the lab than all the other systems. Aggregate stability, a great proof of concept. We know that these undisturbed soils and soils without tillage tend to have much higher aggregate stability than other systems. Additionally, we also know that organic matter has a positive relationship with aggregate stability. So these dairy cropping and mixed vegetable systems, which are able to maintain somewhat higher organic matter than annual grain and processing vegetables, are able to help that aggregate stability out as well. But yeah, this is really nice proof of concept data, because if you go do the slaking demonstration for a group of your friends, you could probably pretty reliably take a sample from a pasture and then take a sample from an adjacent field that's been tilled and be able to show this same concept. Sometimes we use soils that we know are going to be really extreme, like soils that are very, very silty, but you can do this with any soil that's under pasture and something that's been tilled. So that's nice as well. And by and far, when we look at all the soil health indicators in the whole database, we see that pastures are maintaining the highest soil health, highest biological and physical soil health, dairy crop and mixed vegetables, somewhat intermediate, and the processing veg and grain crops have the lowest soil health. So having this type of information we feel is really important. We've had some similar type of information based on soil texture. But it's also important to to help farmers in these different systems, provide them with useful benchmarks to them. So for example, providing a very high benchmark from a mixed vegetable farm to an annual grain farmer is not maybe very useful to them, because it's not as realistic to them, because they're just their scale of their operations are so different. So yeah, one thing that's useful about this data is that we have a lot of metrics for quality standards for air and water, but we don't have as many for soil. So I think that's coming as we start to gather large databases like this that are regionally appropriate, regionally specific to soils and the cropping systems of the area. And these goals and benchmarking data can help farmers calibrate their management against an appropriate cohort of farmers with a similar cropping system who are on the same soil even. So this can be useful for helping to set goals for farmers. And all this data is really based in New York and allows us to provide some useful information across the different soil textures and cropping systems that exist across the state. So another idea to use this data as well is all this information in these tables and graphs can help benchmark of how do I stick out between the mean or the average farmer in my group. But we could also use it to set kind of aspirational goals or targets by cropping system and texture. And basically how we do that is we say, all right, let's target the 75th percentile so that this goal is a little bit higher. And if you achieve this goal, you know that you're in that top 25th percentile of having the best soil health for your cropping system and soil texture. So if you're a processing vegetable operation on loam textured soil, that might look like 3.1% organic matter. Whereas if you're a 5-acre or smaller mixed vegetable farm, that might look like 4.9 or 5% soil organic matter. So we can use those goals to set goals depending on what texture and system we have. There's also a lot of interest recently in building soil organic carbon, soil organic matter as a strategy to help draw down some CO2 from the atmosphere to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And carbon sequestration and soil health improvement go hand in hand. But we know from our soil textures, understanding our inherent soil properties, and cropping system, that different soils will have different abilities to store additional carbon. So we need to, I guess, target and be strategic about our carbon farming initiatives to target the areas that will benefit the greatest. So here is some data. We have this really unique database where we have a very texture-rich database, as well as cropping system information. So what I've done here is basically show the carbon sequestration potential of different cropping systems. And you can see, obviously, that annual grain and processing vegetable have lower soil organic matter. They have a greater capacity to sequester carbon compared to these other systems. So let me back up as well to walk you through this figure. Basically, in soil science, there's we know that the amount of fine silt and clay particles influence how much capacity there is to store soil organic matter on those surfaces. So people have used grassland soils as a benchmark for what that saturation might look like. And so I was able to, with our texture information, be able to say, okay, this red line is the saturation potential for that specific soil. at the bottom for a grassland soil. We know that our agricultural systems are never going to be able to hold as much carbon as a grassland system, but having that gap is helpful. And we also know from theory of carbon saturation theory that soils and fields and systems that are further away from that capacity will more efficiently store carbon than systems that are closer to that. Some of these mixed vegetable systems that are already close to that line, or these pasture systems. So this is important information to have as well, because building soil organic matter is going to happen more efficiently in some of these systems that have less soil organic matter. And it's kind of like thinking about a glass of water. If you're severely degraded, you're going to be able to add much more water to that cup. Cash grain, maybe at 50% capacity, much more to add. But if you're a very rich pasture soil or very rich mixed vegetable soil, it's going to be hard to increase that amount of organic matter that's already in there, because if you add some's going to leak out, so you're already maybe at that potential. So this was one of the findings of the report as well. These grain and processing vegetables probably have the greatest potential to store additional carbon, and pasture and mixed vegetable have less potential to store additional carbon, but obviously maintaining those soil organic matter levels is also really important. So promoting practices to improve soil health in annual grain and processing vegetable systems. We want to help these annual grain and processing vegetable systems, these systems we're asking a lot from, that are producing a lot of grains and vegetables. If we can use strategies that help them become more like the mixed vegetable, the dairy crop, the pasture systems, then we can help improve the soil health of those systems. And we know what that looks like, and we're all working on trying to increase adoption of reducing strategies to reduce or eliminate tillage, increasing adoption of cover crops, perennial sod crops as in dairy cropping systems, manure and compost application. And some of the really exciting things that farmers are working on and being leaders of innovation are really exciting integration of reducing tillage and cover cropping, and the synergies that those two strategies have. Whereas, yeah, we have organic rotational no-till, planting green, bio-strip till are all exciting examples of that. So to wrap up, characterization of soil health in New York State, key summary points. We've known for a long time that inherent soil properties like soil texture, that information is really critical to understanding whether 2.5% soil organic matter is good for a soil or bad for a soil. And what's a newer insight in this report is the large effect that different cropping systems and their associated carbon and nitrogen cycling regimes and soil disturbance regimes have on soil health. And these new metrics from the report can help us to better interpret soil health measurements specific to New York, specific to soil types in New York, and specific to cropping systems in New York. So it can allow us to interpret, benchmark farmers' fields against a cohort of soil type and texture, can allow us to establish aspirational goals for different soil types and cropping systems, so we can have realistic goals of where we should maybe be aiming for. And the new metrics also help us to assess carbon storage potential across soil type and cropping systems. So if there's any questions, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Joseph. Are there any questions, Sean, in the panel box?
Yeah, we've got one question. This is the first time I've seen quantification of soil health characteristics by production systems, does this work point to specific strategies that would work best for specific cropping systems to increase soil health?
I think maybe not specific strategies. I think we're still, I mean, whatever strategies farmers willing to implement, any of these, cover cropping, reducing tillage, and I think we get the most bang for their buck if we can integrate those somehow and do them both at the same time. But I don't think it speaks to any system. There's so many tools in the toolbox for improving soil health, and really it's up to the farmer to find those tools that are the best and most appropriate for their system. So I think, yeah, I think look into the farmers that are the leaders is the best way to get at that.
Okay, what work is being done to better understand the microbial activity and role supporting fertility in these different soil textures?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think so. We see that soil texture is probably plays a role in the access that microbes have of soil organic matter in these different soil textures. Probably in coarse textured soils, there's much more access of organic matter substrates, and then finer textured soil where there's maybe more stabilization on fine silt and clay. So the texture information is critical. But I think, yeah, we need more work. What's exciting is that really now with the Soil Health Institute and other partners across the country looking at the linkages between stuff that's easy to measure, microbial respiration, active carbon, maybe protein in the lab, and and relating that to more complicated, maybe in-field or more laborious lab tests. So hopefully we'll get to a point where we can use this information to somewhat accurately model and improve our understanding of nitrogen fertility than we could with just having soil organic matter information. So the jury's is still out. I know there's a lot of great work being done across the country to try to get at that, but understanding nitrogen availability, nitrogen mineralization is definitely one of those areas that a lot of soil scientists spend a lot of work trying to figure out. So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot coming, and I'm sure we'll continue to get a better understanding of that.
For annual crops, what is the time frame for carbon sequestration in soils where you have good soil health practices? How quickly or slowly can the carbon be lost with a change in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's much faster to lose soil organic carbon than it is to gain it, unfortunately. Sometimes a tillage event can cause losses that are pretty big. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. I think soil organic matter changes very slowly. There is just so much organic matter in the top 6 inches of soil that adding 5,000, 10,000 pounds of additional residues. So maybe I think a realistic amount of soil organic matter that you could hope to accrue in a year is maybe 0.1 to maybe 0.2 if you're doing stuff really well. But yeah, so these things take a long time to change, and we're also, in measuring it, dealing with soil variability in the field. So yeah, That's a complicated question of how fast things are lost versus gained, but yeah, I don't have a great answer for that.
All right, Joe, it looks like that's what we have right now. I'll go ahead and post your email address also in the chat, so it's there after your presentation comes down.
Cool, thank you so much.
Thanks, Joseph. And I want to give an additional shout out to Joseph, because he really stepped up when we needed a platform to host this meeting. These meetings go a lot more smooth when they're in the Zoom webinar format, and Joseph and Cornell were able to allow us to use their Zoom account in order to make this happen. And along with that, there was a lot of heavy lifting work on Joseph's behalf, kind of adding people, sending emails. And so on behalf of the society, we just really want to thank you for, one, being a presenter today, being a presenter today, and two, for allowing us to use this platform and all the work that you put into making it happen. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicole.
And coming up next, we're still a little ahead of schedule, but we'll keep moving forward. We have Shawnna Clark. Before I give her introduction, I do want to point everyone to the chat. I kind of did a poor job explaining the QR code for CCA credits. So in the chat at 10:13, Heath explains the process, and if you have the app, if you do not have the CCA app, there are further instructions to direct you to go directly through CCA to self-report those credits. And I want to thank Jessica, another one of our members of our executive council, for doing the background work to get those CCA credits in place for everyone today. So let's transition over to Shawnna Clark, our next presenter. Shawnna is currently the USDA NRCS Big Flats Plant Materials Center manager located near Corning, New York. And due to a lack of employees that many of us are aware of at the center over the past 3 years, she's really been a Jack and Jill of all trades. And she takes on all the responsibilities of managing those 203 acres and the associated buildings. During her time at the Plant Materials Center, she has conducted many studies, hosted trainings, such as pollinator habitat establishment, cover crops, riparian buffer establishment, native plants for conservation practices, and biofuels. She grew up in Lockport, New York, later moved to Plattsburgh to attend an undergraduate school, majoring in environmental science and GIS. And while there, she attended a semester at the Minor Institute, where she solidified her love for the environment and passion for plant ecology. Upon graduation, she did go to graduate school at University of Buffalo and completed a thesis on establishing cover crops at the time of corn planting, and received her graduate degree there in natural resources management. And while in grad school, she interned at the Plant Materials Center and later worked there as a natural resource specialist until she became the manager in 2015. During her free time, she enjoys all outdoor activities, Buffalo sports teams, so I'm guessing she's a happy camper right now, traveling and spending time with friends and family. So Shawnna, I open the floor to you. We're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm trying to find my presentation here, so just give me a minute.
Sure thing.
I thought I had it up. Is that showing up?
We can see one of your screens. It's not your presentation though.
About now? No?
No, it hasn't changed.
All right. We just went through this earlier. I'm gonna, it worked fine, right?
Yeah, it did. You can try it again. It should ask you what particular presentation you want to share. Another option, if you can't get it to work, is I can have your slides here and advance them for you.
All right. Let me try it one more time. How's that?
Got it.
All right. All right, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Nicole, for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here to share one of the studies that we've been working on here at the Plant Materials Center. So yeah, get ready. You're going to be hit with a lot of information in a very short period of time. I'm going to be talking about the adaptability of cool season cover crop cultivars in the Northeast United States. But first, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Plant Materials Center program in general, then give an overview of the study, the methods, and then we're going to go right into the species that we looked at and evaluated. And like I said, I'm going to go pretty fast and then throw a lot of information, but no, some of the information I have not presented here today, and because this is just a part of it. So anything that I have and I'm sharing, and you need more information, more data, more numbers, more of the statistical analysis behind some of these species, please let me know. I have all that information, and being a little bit behind and not really looking at this in the past couple, maybe year, I hate to admit it, but just because once I get started on doing it, something always seems to come up. So I tried to pull out the most important information to get to you today that worked best here. So if you guys aren't familiar with the Plant Materials Program, it's a nationwide network of about 27 plant material centers, and they're based on their ecologically distinct areas. And our main mission and goals are to seek out new conservation plans and plant technology to assist our NRCS field office, other collaborators, local state agencies, other federal agencies, and landowners. Ultimately, the landowners benefit the most from this information. Yes, and based on these studies, it helps develop, the innovative ways to use and manage a variety of conservation plants that we're looking at. And just want to touch on, like, when I say new, we're not finding new plants, we're just finding plants and getting ones that are adapted to our area by testing them here on site, as well as other areas throughout the Northeast. Actually hit that. Underneath there is the link to the Plant Materials Program homepage. And there you'll find all the information on all the different centers, publications, what they're working on. And there's also a link to sign up for our newsletter, where you'll get monthly updates on some of the studies and information that any of the plant material centers are doing. So if you would like to sign up for that, just go to the Plant Materials Program homepage and you'll see that there. But like I said, there's a wealth of information there, not just from our center, but all the centers throughout the country, and a lot of other links and information directed there. The Big Flats Plant Material Center is located, as Nicole said, in Big Flats, New York, and we're right near Corning. Sometimes we're considered the Southern Tier, Central New York, Finger Lakes area. And we cover resource or plant needs and resource concerns from Maine to Pennsylvania. Our NRCS, our field offices will come to us and say they have needs from the field offices or landowners that are looking for plants for either stream bank, grape pollinator plants. How do we seed it? When do we seed it? We try to help them out either by conducting a study, doing literature search, and there may be even information that we have that we just need to get out into some sort of like a tech report, short tech report to get this information out. Since the center here has been here since the 40s. With moving back into a new office, I've come in contact with a lot of old studies, information that is still pertinent today that would be helpful. So here at the Plant Materials Center, we encompass 203 acres. It includes a lot of different facilities and equipment. We harvest our plant releases, and we also do the seed cleaning, and we have a plant storage facility. And like Nicole mentioned, the staff currently consists of just me. And next Tuesday, I will have a new employee starting, so that's very exciting. Some of the things that we address here at the Plant Materials Center, the resource concerns, as I like to call them, cropland erosion and soil health, water quality, wetlands, and riparian buffers, excuse me, critical area stabilization, stream bank stabilization, native plants for conservation systems. We've looked at biofuels, and we also look at wildlife, food and cover, agroforestry, and pollinator concerns, which we've done a lot of work in those areas in pollinator habitat establishment since 2008. I thought I just want to mention, I threw that eagle. I don't do a lot of work with wildlife or like with eagles, but that was my visitor yesterday here at the PMC, which was pretty cool. So right now I'm just gonna give a quick overview and dive, basically why we want to study the cool season cultivars and the adaptation trials. So when we're recommending cover crops, cool season cover crops for landowners, when you go to look for, say, like a red clover or cereal rye, and you go to like a seed company and you want to see what kind of species are out there based on some of the recommendations that someone gave you, well, then you come to see like there's all these different cultivars, which one's going to work, which one's not. And so we attempted to try to do field research to help get rid of this daunting task. So, and this also like helps fill in, the state and regional data gaps with specific recommendations. So when you just, when you go to like, I want a winter cover crop, you see like, maybe you get one from Florida. Winter cover crop in Florida is not the same as a winter cover crop here in New York. So, and this also helps strengthen, the NRCS practices for cover crop and the species are recommended. So the PMCs that encompass the Northeast are the Beltsville, Maryland Plant Materials Center, Alderson, West Virginia, and the Big Flats. I'm only going to concentrate on the Big Flats data. Our soil types are Unadilla silt loam, which are really good agricultural soils. And our average free frost date is October 10th. Frost date is October 10th, and our low temperatures get there between about 0 degrees to -3 during this study. So, excuse my voice. I've been having, I've had laryngitis and haven't been feeling the best. It's not cold or anything, so I'm trying to drink at the same time. So the methods that we used were we hand broadcasted all of our species here. We break them into the soil as best we could and then cultipact for good seed to soil contact. All legumes received the proper inoculation. All plots were replicated 4 times in the completely randomized block design. And we planted, you know, during the study, we planted them in different fields each year, just so we're depleting, and we want to break up some of the crop cycles. We did add, I didn't add this year, we did add soil amendments based on soil tests, and we wanted a basic NPK of 40, 60, 30. And so we added that when needed based on our soil tests. So, excuse me. So the attributes that we looked at during the study for the different varieties were as follows: the emergence and germination throughout the month, every week. And this is a good indicator of quick establishment for soil protection and weed suppression. You won't see these in the charts that are coming, but I'll definitely just mention that. But you can see that in some of the other data, like the biomass percent cover is where it's reflected. Obviously, the winter survival. If we're going to plant a winter or fall cover crop, we may or may not want it to make it through the winter. If we want like a grass or a grain to winter kill, it's easier to work with in the following spring as far as mechanical or chemical termination. Or maybe we want the cover crop to make it through the winter. So that's a very important attribute. Also, the maturity date we're talking about is 50% bloom or anthesis, and biomass and height and percent covers were also taken at that 50% bloom date. Also, it's very important to look at each cultivar for their disease and insect ranking. You know, are they gonna? We don't want to plant a cultivar that is gonna attract certain diseases or bring diseases or insects into our fields based on it. So we looked at that, and just note that none of the cultivars or any of the species had any increase in disease or insects that would affect the seeding or the adaptability of the cultivars. As I mentioned, we took the biomass for most species at 50% flowering date. We also took percent cover throughout the growing season and heights throughout the growing season. But you'll see in the charts that I have listed, I only put the biomass and heights for the species at the 50% flowering date. Just a note. So we're just gonna dive right in. I'm not gonna go into specifically all the benefits of the cover crops, but I do touch on them, you know, as you'll see as I go through all the species. But they're not, you know, I just figured that everybody knew all the benefits, you know, for the importance of conserving our soils and erosion control and benefits, and it can't be stressed enough. So I'm just not gonna dive right in, you know, go into too much detail with that. And again, as I go forward, if anybody is looking for any more additional data on these specific cultivars, especially such as like background information on any of these cultivars, where were they bred, what were they bred for, what seed companies are selling these, what's the price, or any additional data that you don't see here, please let me know, and I'll make sure I get that information to you. And hopefully in the next month or so, I'll have the final study reports that will have all that information as well. So first up to bat we had is Balanza clover. It's one of the newer cover crop clover legume species that have come onto the scene. It's a slow growing when seeded, but it starts to grow really fast very early in the following spring. Has high dry matter production, recovers really good from heavy grazing, and what's one of the main uses, because you're not going to use this for erosion control in the fall because of its slow above ground growth. It puts all of its energy into storing up carbohydrates in the roots for the winter time, and it has really, really nice deep roots. One of the downsides is the seedling vigor is not as good as some of the other clovers. Two clover, or the cultivars that we looked at was Fixation and Frontier. So I just, based on the results that we found that fixation is the promising legume for the Northeast for this region, and that's from Grasslands, Oregon, and found that some of the best dates for the seeding is 9/1 and 9/15. We did a little bit more than some of the other centers looking at different seeding dates. So that's why you're going to see 9/1, 9/15, and then we looked at one year, we looked at a later date, but this will be improved upon, based on the adaptability of some of the best performing cultivars in the study. That's one of our next projects or next studies, is to go a little bit further with that. And then, excuse me, then although Frontier, you can see it's a little bit earlier flowering, which is nice if you're going to use it as a cover crop, because you want to be able to terminate the legume to get the maximum benefits as early as you can, so you can get your cash crop or whatever you want to plant after the cover crops to reap from the nitrogen fixation benefits of the clover. But it's not winter, it's not adapted to the winter here in the Northeast. So if you wanted to use Balanza clover in your operation, you'd want to go with the fixation and plant it anywhere between 9/1, 9/15. But the downside is that it matures a lot later. And after I brought in all of these charts, I noticed that I took the descriptions away. And so what the dates are, as you're seeing, is the seeding date, and I don't have the harvest date, but you can see the days after planting. So if anybody wants any of those dates, it was anywhere between, for Balanza, it was the end of May or the first week of June. So here's just some nice pictures of fixation at harvest. I tried to pull the plant out to show the roots, a lot of the fibrous roots, the thick roots, but obviously I wasn't able to pull all of them. And you can kind of see some of the nodules on the picture of the right, and it's very similar looking maybe to like a white clover. And it's also a really good pollinator plant. The bees were all over this species. So next we looked at black oats, and here's another one that's, when looking into obtaining some cultivars, we realized that, we had Soil Saver and Kosake black oats, but looking at it, the Soil Saver black oats is a different species than the Kosake, which is actually more the same genus and species as like common oats. So they're both a little bit different, both bred for increased winter hardiness. Their growth forms are a lot different as well. Soil Saver grows really tall, really fast. Kosake tends to have more of a prostrate growth, a lot more tillers, a lot thicker stems. But like, here's one of the other things to keep in mind, like the increased cold tolerance, but these were bred in the southern region, like Auburn University, which is in Alabama and Brazil. And these are used more for southern areas of the country. But one of the good things that we found, I forgot this picture. I just wanted to show the difference in the winter hardiness. The Soil Saver on the left, completely winter killed. These pictures were taken in February 22nd, 2016, completely winter killed, and where the Kosake still had some green and still had a little bit of, increased cold tolerance. And then the seed picture of the black seeded oats, you can tell it's a little bit darker from your standard regular oats. So we seeded the black oats and black seeded oats. It's where our target seeding rate was 42 seeds per square foot. And that equates to about a 60 pound per acre seeding rate. One thing to keep in mind, their seeds per pound are completely different. The black seeded oats are more like oats, so they have less seeds per pound, and the black oats, the Soil Saver black oats has like over twice as much seeds per pound. So just make sure you keep sort of be aware of that, because it's very important when ordering or seeding your any cover crop. So you're not going to want to use these if you want a winter hardy cover crop, but what the good choice would be is they're very quick growing in the fall when planted at 9-1 and 9-15. And so it's good for emergency forage and for good stand and fall quality into the winter, because you're going to see that way into February, there's still got a good mulch layer on the soil surface, and you're not going to have to use any mechanical or chemical termination for these species. So next we'll go into, we looked at radish cultivars. We found we attained 12 different cultivars and varieties, seeded them at 9 pounds an acre. And there's a couple different types of radish that are out there. You have the daikon radish. Those are those big fleshy white roots. When planted early enough, they get 2 inches or more in diameter. Those big roots go down 2 feet into the soil. And you have an oilseed variety, which are more stubbier, a lot of lateral roots, put on more growth in their above ground biomass, and are a little bit different in texture. The deer don't tend to bother those as much. So it's different, it's important if you're looking for those big fleshy roots to know which ones you want and when you're ordering them. They're not winter hardy any throughout the study. They all winter killed. They're very good at weed suppression, good at end scavenging, and very good at building up soil organic matter. And one thing to note is that you don't want to plant these in the same area 2 years in a row. And so they all performed very well with sufficient cover when seeded at 9-1 and 9-15, except for Graza. For some reason, that one didn't do well here as far as like winter hardiest establishment and germination. Not just here, but it didn't perform well at any locations, any plant material center that planted these. So if you want those large, big flesh, those big, huge taproot, or those large taproots, you're gonna want to seed these by by September 1st, or somewhere around that date, maybe the end of August. They still do well when seeded at 9-15, but you're gonna have smaller roots, but these smaller roots are still gonna be able to go really far down into the soil and have a really good cover above ground. And as you can kind of see, I'm looking at the chart, when seeded at 9-1, we harvest as much as we could with the below ground biomass, is that they're very similar, the shoot to root ratio. But when seeded at 9-15, you're gonna get a lot more growth above ground, and you're not going to have a lot of time to get all those big fleshy tap roots because a lot of, just with the temperatures and getting later into the season. I was talking about the oilseed varieties. Those are the Defender, the Concord, and the Control. And those are used a lot for the biofumigation for nematode control. So, but they don't have those big roots, and they put, depending on when seeded, they put most of their energy into the above ground biomass, and the deer tend not to bother those as much because of the texture of the leaves. They're very rough, and all the other ones, they get grazed. We have a lot of deer here, so a lot of deer pressure on a lot of these cover crops. And here's some nice visuals comparing the different types of radishes that I was talking about. On the left, you have the sod buster, which is those big daikon radish that was 13 inches long. You can see I couldn't pull them out as they would go way farther into the soil. And then you have your Defender, one of those oilseed radishes. They're a little bit stubbier, only like 6-7 inches. And then they have a lot of those smaller lateral roots, really good to reduce soil compaction, still with the smaller roots. And then you can kind of see, I'll show you in the next pictures, is what you're going to see, the lower right-hand corners, what you're going to see when they're starting to decompose. You're going to have these big holes in the ground. You're going to be left with these mushy, gushy, radish, fleshy things that they're going to smell really bad, like really bad. If you've ever worked with these, you will definitely know in late spring that these are decomposing because they smell like wet socks. I don't know, or I can't even explain it. You just have to find out for yourself, I guess. And these pictures just showing, again, on the right, a larger view of what it looks like when they're decomposing in late winter, almost early spring. And what you're going to find the later that you plant, on the left picture is the later, what you're going to find as far as the roots when planted at a later date. They still have a lot of roots and they're still getting in there. They're just not those big fleshy taproots like you see, which is more characteristics of the quote unquote, you know, the tillage radish, as a lot of people call them, but that's just one kind.
Shawnna, we got a question here. Would you recommend the 915 date radish or certain cultivar for fields that have tile drainage? They've heard from farmers that taproots can sometimes plug tile lines.
Depending, yeah. I mean, I would recommend probably the 915 date, because you're not going to get those large taproots that may interfere with that. I don't have, and if you're hearing with the tile drainage, we haven't worked with them here, but if you even have those bigger radishes and you seed them at an early date, but you might not want to do this because the seed is expensive, the higher your seeding rate, you're not going to get those big radishes if you plant them, those big flashy taproots at 9-1, because they're going to outcompete each other. But you're still going to have pretty significant root depths. And if seeded at 9-1, yeah, the roots are a lot thinner and smaller, but they're still going to reach down, 18 inches or 24 inches into the soil. So they may not be the best for those areas if you have tile drainage. I specifically, I don't have a lot of knowledge and know-how if that date would really have a effect or not. But it wouldn't have as much effect, I think, as those big roots would.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, just making a note to see if I can find any additional information on that. Okay, next up is crimson clover. We looked at 6 different cultivars of crimson clover seeded at 8 pounds to the acre. Another cool season legume, tolerating a large range of site conditions. The biggest difference with the crimson clover cultivars that we noticed was their ability to withstand the winter conditions, winter hardiness, the maturity dates, and their hard seediness. This is also a very good, excellent pollinator plant for bumblebees, because they just, in the springtime, they're just all over the plants. And so what we found is that for our area and the other centers in the Northeast, is that the seeding date is the most important for establishment of some of these cultivars. They're best seeded by 9-1 for the optimal biomass and N content in the following spring. You could still plant them at 9-15, but you're not going to get the same benefits as you would if you did it at 9-1. We found if you seed them even earlier, sometimes in not this study, but some of the other studies that we've done here, seeding them into, even in the beginning of August, you don't want them to start to produce the seed heads, because once they do, it really decreases their winter survivability once they get to that point. So we found here 9-1 is optimal. And the best performing ones is Kentucky Pride, which is kind of a new one. That's out of Grasslands, Oregon. Dixie, which has been around for forever, performed the best at both, were the best performing at both dates. And some of the other ones when seeded at 9-1 performed well when seeded at 9-1. but you know, the AUs, those are from Auburn University, which is Alabama, and sometimes bringing some of these cultivars from the south up here. They don't perform as they would down there, but if you see them kind of early, they tend to do. They do fairly well here. So it's just seeding date is very important for those. And here's a nice picture of the plot in full bloom in late spring. Next up is our red clover. We looked at 8 different cultivars and types of those. A lot of people are familiar with the red clover as far as, you know, using it for hay and forage. And most of the time they're using the medium, the double cut types. And so when you're looking at red clover cultivars out there, there's hundreds. So it's very difficult to find ones that are gonna, you know, be adapted for your area, but there's a lot of information out in the universities, you know, on the adaptability for a lot of different forage cultivars. But like I said, we're looking at them for cover crop purposes, and especially if we want to look for the earliest flowering ones to use for cover crop purposes. And a lot of these are selected for their disease and insect resistance, their yields, and are they persistent? And like I just said, their flowering date. And we found that these, not that it was a surprise, they are very, very, very attractive to deer, especially when you're trying to capture flowering dates, and the deer will not let that happen. So in 2016 and 2017, the deer beat us to it. So we weren't able to get any biomass data, and the days to bloom we were able to get, just because some of the other ones that they didn't hit, we had flags, and the deer tended to stay away from the flags, maybe because they were waving, that we could get some of the bloom data on those, but it was negligible for biomass data. For red clover, it was best if it was seeded by 9-1 for all the cultivars that we looked at. And then once you start seeding a little bit later in the year, differences in their winter survivability. 2016, we had a weird spring. It warmed up very quickly at the end of February into March with high, you know, some of the temperatures were in the 70s, and the lows didn't get down too low. But then right after that, we had a very hard cold snap where lows were getting down to the single digits with highs only reaching the upper 20s. So some of these started to regrow. And by the time we went and did our winter hardiness counts, which is usually, you know, mid-April, a lot of the stuff that started to regrow got hit by these cold temperatures, which really reduced some of their winter hardiness in the year in 2016. I put it on here like cinnamon, you know, the cinnamon plus was the top performing, but as you can see, if you look at some data, if seeded by 9-1, a lot of them performed very well at those dates. It's just if you had to seed a little bit later into the year, that one seemed to be the best. And also like Freedom and Dynamite, they were just as good as well. I just didn't write those on there. And here's a nice plot of the clovers when seeded, or, you know, in full bloom, the monarch butterfly on it. I'm trying to go a little bit faster. So the next one we looked at was the hairy vetch in the cultivars, and we used one woolly pod vetch cultivar because its use is similar to that of hairy vetch, but it's a cultivar, an early flowering cultivar out of California. And if you're familiar with hairy vetch, it's very high biomass producing. It has hard seed, it has very maturing dates, so it's really, really hard to work with. A lot of farmers, a lot of growers tend to stay away from it because of these reasons, and it's hard to terminate. But it's very, very productive as far as like the biomass production and the end contributions that it can have. And it's very, you know, relatively winter hardy when seeded at 9-1 and 9-15. And when we looked at these, it showed one of the most winter hardiest among the legumes. especially when seeded, 9-1. I mean, it wasn't like significantly, like I said, I didn't put the significance in here, not significantly super different, but in the later seeding dates, it was a lot higher than all the other legumes that we seeded. And Lana, it wasn't very winter hardy here in the Northeast, because like I said, it was a Western bred one, but it did have early flowering date. And what we found was that Purple Bounty, when seeded at 9:15 and later seeding dates, the later seeding dates was one of the best because it produced a lot of biomass and was also one of the earliest flowering cultivars available. And here's a nice picture of stand of hairy vetch, the hairy vetch cultivar, the hairy vetch plot. If you've ever seen them in the spring, that is just a mass of vines intertwined together. And when you're trying to work with something like that, it's crazy when you're trying to do anything with it. So doesn't look too bad here, but if you want to get down and maybe count like seedlings or try to do biomass, you're just tangled in this stuff, and it's just so much of it. And then it's hard to terminate and get to the head, but it has like those soft fleshy stems. So if you terminate it at 50% flowering, you can get good kill on that. But you don't want it's very important to terminate these at the right time, and you also don't want these to go to seed. You're going to be seeing these for a long time. Currently, the plant materials, not me, but the program and ARS and a few other cooperators are looking deeper into hairy vetch and their cultivars to try to reduce the hard seediness and also increase some of the winter hardiness in some of the cultivars.
Hey, Shawnna, it's Nicole. I want to honor Erica's time to present. Yep. So if you can wrap it up by 11:30, so 4 more minutes to wrap it up, and then we'll transition over to Erica. Thank you.
I sure can. I got one last one to go. Oh, 2 last. I'm going to go really quick now. One of the other ones we looked at was the field peas. One of the major take homes is to know which types, because like I said, there's another example of knowing your cultivar, because you have spring and winter types. You don't want to plant a spring type in the winter and expect it to make it through the following spring. And we did have 3 of them. I didn't put them here. It was Dun, Arabica, Maxim, and Whistler to some extent. The most promising cultivar we found out of that was Survivor 15, another cultivar out of Grasslands, Oregon. And that one seemed to do the best with winter hardiness and biomass. One thing to mention on this is that these species need to be drilled because they need to be deep into the soil because the critters will get them, and just for winter survival. You can't have them laying on top of the field. I'm just some of the damage from that 2016 cold snap that they were growing, but eventually they succumbed to the cold temperatures. And the last one is the cereal rye. We looked at 14 different cultivars, and there, I'll just skip right to the results. This is another one that's very important to know the cultivars, because you have winter ones that are bred in California and Florida, and they do not make it through the winter here, act more like a spring cultivar, but are good for emergency and quick fall cover that you don't have to terminate in the fall, and has a nice mulch layer. Also, but as far as all the cultivars, they're all very winter hardy at any of the seeding dates and produce enough biomass in the spring, even planted late into October, and sometimes some of these will do well in November, not seen here. And this is just to show the difference of the cultivars of the Merced and how much taller it was in the fall than some of the other cultivars, and how quickly it did grow. And then when they started to, and this picture shows when they started to winter kill, as opposed to some of the other, this is the Florida and the Merced, as you can see. And I am done. I just want to point out that for the rye is another one that's really important when looking at seeds per pound in different lots, because it's really going to affect what you order and what you're going to put out there. If you're just looking at strictly your seeding it at 40, 4 or 100 pounds per acre. It's going to make a big difference. So that's something very important. We have this publication that showcases all the plant material centers in the Northeast and their results. Not in-depth technical, but shows what the adaptability of the species that I just went through. All right, thank you. Sorry about going on the overtime. Like I said, I tried really hard to move as fast as I could.
Got one quick question. During your cover crop field trials, how is each proposed non-native species evaluated for its potential to become invasive in the Northeast?
Well, we're looking, these are species that have been, they're not like I said, like new species that have been used as cover crops for a long time. And what we're trying to do is look at the ones that were available and see if they were adapted to our area. And we don't, maybe besides like the vetch or some of the other ones that are a little bit more persistent, but some of these are just annuals. And if you don't let them go to seed and you terminate them at the right time, and knowing the growth and the patterns and the phenology of some of these species, they can be managed without having them become invasive. Like I said, maybe hairy vetch might be the one that would be a little bit more of a problem as far as invasiveness and having it last a long period of time. And since we've been looking at not just these, but other species, and we haven't had any problems with invasiveness, like I said, except for maybe the hairy vetch, because of the hard seed that it has and its persistence to last in the soil.
Thank you, Shawnna. If anybody else has any questions, I put Shawna's contact information in the chat.
I'm sure there's going to be. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Shawnna. So lastly, we have Erica Goodman from American Farmland Trust. Shawnna, if you can, there we go, stop, yeah. And then Erica, you can get your stuff up there. So she's going to present on farms under threat, state of the state, and what's at stake in New York. I first heard the farms under threat information in 2019 with Jimmy Daukus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but at the international meeting in Pittsburgh, and it was super interesting. So I'm excited for Erica to share this info with you as well. She is the New York Regional Director at American Farmland Trust, where she oversees the organization's work in New York as well as neighboring New Jersey. She's a native New Yorker and grew up as part of a multi-generational dairy farm in Washington County. She has previously held roles at AFT's National Communications team, served as Associate Director of Corporate Partnerships at Food Corps, and since 2016, she has served as the Representative at Large for urban, suburban, and rural non-farm interests on the New York State Soil and Water Conservation Committee. She was also named one of Hunter College's 40 under 40 in New York City food policy in 2018. Welcome, Erica, and we're so happy to have you here today.
Great, thanks Nicole, and thanks for the introduction. I encourage everyone as I get started to stand up, take a little 7th inning stretch while we get going here, because I know you've all been on for a moment. But again, I'm Erica Goodman. I'm the New York Regional Director for American Farmland Trust, and I'm based out of Saratoga County, where our offices are. And today I'm going to share some of the most recent findings from AFT's multi-phase research project called Farms Under Threat. This work was started several years ago, but it's becoming more and more relevant. And I think, we all can point to different parts of the unprecedented times we live in, but I think looking at some of this information about our farmland across the country, as well as in New York State, really helps us to rethink the systems we rely on to kind of move things forward. So I'll start talking about Farms Under Threat by giving more of an overview, a quick overview of AFT, and then an overview of 2 of the focus areas that we addressed in this report. The first is a spatial analysis, identifying where farmland has been threatened, and then a quick review of our state policy scorecard. I'll spend more time on some specific spatial analysis and see how that plays out in a couple places in New York State. And then also have a quick glimpse ahead at some of the work that we'll be doing as part of this research. So for those who may not be familiar with American Farmland Trust, I just want to give you a quick overview. We've been around since 1980, about 30 years in New York State and actively working here. And our work rests on the mission of saving the land that sustains us. And we accomplish that through three key areas: protecting farmland in New York. We advocate for funding to support permanent protection of farmland and also have historically worked with communities on their plans for agriculture and supporting farmland protection at the community level. We also work to promote sound farming practices. AFT was founded with a vision of really bringing together the agricultural and environmental communities, and that continues through our work today. So through partnerships, we work on different programs across the state and across the country, supporting farmers to adopt and expand their regenerative farming practices, as well as different policies to include agricultural voice, whether it be at the state or federal level, especially as we're looking at climate policies these days. And finally, we work to keep farmers in the land. We need new generations of farmers in order to continue this work, and we're seeing a massive generational transition. So through our policies and programs, we're really helping a new generation to gain access, and also programs that are helping them to succeed in farming. So back to the topic of farms under threat. So what is farms under threat? I thought you would never ask, so I'll tell you. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to really document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land. So that includes nationwide farmland and rangeland, while at the same time offering up policy solutions to save that land. So looking historically at what happened and starting to develop new plans for the future. In addition to AFT, we work with a lead partner, Conservation Science Partners, on this work, as well as this is put together through support from USDA NRCS. So we're really grateful for that support and those partnerships. The report uses cutting-edge geospatial technology to identify exactly where agricultural land has been paved over, where it's been fragmented or otherwise converted to uses that might jeopardize agriculture. Coupled with this, we analyzed how, we analyzed how state policymakers have responded and have identified the path forward for public policy at the state level. These results are being used in many ways, and we released this information last summer. And so we're working on raising public awareness for opportunities like we have today, as well as put together tools for communities and practitioners to use in decision making. We want to inform state and federal policy, as well as make sure we're encouraging more direct and permanent farmland protection. So the report is about farmland conversion and the policy response. But as we continue this work, we know it's going to be much more than that. So I wanted to, before diving into the findings itself, it's worth showing quickly, as this is a question that's raised often with groups like we have today, what are the data sources? This is from the appendix of the report, and I encourage you, for those who want to dig into this a little bit, and you're all probably very familiar with these resources, but you know, we do get the question of what's our source and how do we identify land use cover, and how did we think about farmland quality? Another thing you'll kind of hear throughout the presentation today is this concept of PBR. PBR is pulling those concepts or those data sources on the right to identify the most productive, versatile, and resilient land that supports intensive food production and crop production with the least environmental impact. So what's the most productive, versatile, and resilient with those least environmental impacts? So you'll kind of hear that throughout today. So I wanted to first give you kind of the national look at the what we found. So this is showing the threat to farmland, and you can see it's there. It's across the country and kind of playing out in different ways in different states. And our analysis shows that between 2001 and 2016 alone, 11 million acres of farmland were lost or compromised. And this is equivalent to about 2,000 acres a day, and actually is the same amount as the land that was needed in 2017 to produce fruits, vegetables, and nuts. So that in 1 year, that's as much land as produced food, and we lost that in this time frame. And so it's not insignificant, and something that I think we're identifying and will continue to move forward in the work to identify solutions. So this latest work that we're looking at today gives a state-by-state look at where conversion falls relative to each state land's resources. So you can see that farm and range land are really divided into the top half and the bottom half of each state's agricultural land according to this PBR analysis. Again, that's productivity, versatility, and resilience. And this shows that our analysis can kind of help states to identify and protect the most important resources, knowing that each state is different. So we're kind of able to take that national look, but then to focus in more on where states can target their time. So while we looked at conversion in every state, some of those states rose to the top for the most threatened, and just wanted to kind of identify why and how I picked these threatened states. Is Texas tops the list. They saw the greatest number of acres converted at 1.4 million. So that was a factor looking at that piece. And then New Jersey is also near the top because they saw a 9% conversion rate over the 15-year period. In addition to identifying these most threatened states, our data also looks at new insights into what's the nature of some of these threats and how these states are facing it. So out of a total of the 11 million acres of conversion across the country, roughly 4 million of those acres were converted by urban development. And this is the type of conversion I think we're all most familiar with: subdivisions, strip malls, big box stores, Amazon warehouses, what have you. So something that's very visible and something we're more familiar with. In addition to this, the report also kind of brings into focus the first time the concept of low density residential development. So we've known it's been happening because, you know, all across the country, we're kind of seeing this large lot scattered housing, and it's been fragmenting and disrupting the farm landscape. But until this report, no one has ever really been able to map it out and measure it too at the state level in an ability to kind of drill down and look at it through our mapping software. And once we mapped it, we really realized how big of a problem it was. So of that 11 million, 7 million acres that were converted in that 15-year period were low density residential land use. And since it's new, I think there's still a lot we're going to continue to learn about how low density residential affects agriculture. Anecdotally, we do know that where non-farming neighbors start to move in, it does get harder to farm. Some farmers may find these new opportunities to sell products to their new neighbors and to really sell directly to those new markets. But for the most part, it will be harder for existing farmers to stay in business, to kind of have some consistency of the ecological services they provide, and harder for new generations to really step in and take over in these areas. So this may be why low density residential conversion can be a sign of what's to come for future land loss. In New York State, we actually found that those areas over that 15-year period that had were low density residential, they were 10 times more likely to be fully urbanized. And Farms Under Threat also found that 78% of the land in New York State that was threatened over the period of time we looked was this low density residential. So it's, I think, important, especially in New York State, to think about what are the implications and how can we start to address and really understand what this looks like. So I wanted to spend a little bit more time, since that is kind of what rises to the top for us in the state, on this low density residential. What we found is that low density residential development is best understood as a spectrum. So that's what you're seeing here on the screen, ranging from large lot subdivisions to rural areas where there might be more individual houses scattered, but still fragmenting the landscape. So on the left, you kind of see that example of more developed 2 to 5 acre lots, which everyone kind of recognizes as sprawl or starting to move towards that urban density type development. We know that in this case, land is pretty much lost to commercial farming, or at least to some scale that we're considering. In the middle, you can kind of see where there's open farmland, but it's surrounded by houses. So it's kind of in that holding pattern of the next domino to fall to move on onto the left part of the spectrum. And on the right, where most of this land is still open, and if you look closely, there are a few houses here and there, is a little bit less compromised, or it's still more compromised and less developed, but is on its path potentially to that further development. So it's also important to consider, you know, as we're looking at this, these large lot housing fragments and the impact on the agricultural land base, is it can impact productivity, marketing and management options for working farms. It's also, I think, important for the audience we have here today to think about the potential impacts this fragmentation could have for a district or a watershed where agricultural land is, and really the specific practices on that land are important for the farm community and important for some of the soil health, water quality, and climate goals that are being worked towards. So to demonstrate this a little bit more, drill down a bit more, we're going to look at a couple of communities. So these next two maps are actually pulled from the Farms Under Threat website. So I know we have folks here from across New York State, so I encourage you to visit the site and you can kind of focus in at a really close level to the communities and the areas you work. So this one, we are looking at kind of that lower density residential that's to the left of the spectrum, or some places where it's probably further developed, or you know, there's more of that low density into urban, and we're seeing the potential there. Just so you're kind of aware, the red parts are the urban development, the orange, yellowish color is low density, and then the various colors of green are farmland. And so I think, you know, this is Ithaca, Tompkins County. It's probably a place several of you on here are more familiar with than I am, but it's, you know, it's kind of looking at where these population centers are, where it's starting to push out. And I think it's important to ask, like, what's the future of farming here, and the potential for ecological services and the role of farmers to address some of the water quality and soil issues that you do, is to really look at, you know, where there's this increase, or where is this stretch of low density residential, and what could be the potential if those sections start to turn more red on some of those goals. So this is certainly something much more developed and with greater of those low density sections. So I want to give another example kind of on the other side of the spectrum, that was those kind of scattered houses that are kind of not as visible. This is actually from my hometown of Fort Anne in Washington County. And again, you'll kind of see the more urban, or the town or the village of Fort Anne is here in red, and you see some of these pockets of orange where the low density has happened. And I think, you know, this is interesting, or it's just like the nuance that's been able to be captured with this data is, you know, you see this section to the left. As Nicole mentioned, I grew up as part of a dairy farm family, and for a long time it was the Goodmans and the Oles who farmed on this road, and both farms have kind of moved on from those practices and we're no longer farming anymore. But some houses are starting to pop up and that land's being fragmented, but you can't really, it's not as visible as a whole subdivision going in, or, you know, it's building up over time. And so the map was able to identify what are some of those areas, even in these rural farming communities, where you're starting to see that fragmentation. And so I think, again, you know, it may be a little bit more time before it really starts to impact agriculture at scale, but it does impact kind of how some plans are being put around for farmer protection and planning and ecological services as well. So I think kind of these two together are just some examples of how low density conversion can be more traditionally harder to see, and there hasn't been as much of a policy response as a result. So, you know, Farms Under Threat doesn't just show the nature of the threats, and you know, this kind of looks and identifies land use cover. We also looked at the value of the land and kind of the quality of the land. To identify the best farmland, we did quantify this again to identify the nationally significant farmland using the PVR, productivity, versatility, and resiliency, looking at every acre of land in the US. And this PVR index did lead us to identifying what are the most naturally or nationally significant agricultural lands, and so the best land in the country for producing food and other crops. And when nationally significant land is impacted by development, intensive food production is pushed to more marginal lands. You're seeing input costs are much higher, crop yields are lower, soil degrades more quickly, and environmental impacts are much greater. Farmers are really challenged to make an adequate income and risk going out of business. So, you know, so we wanted to roll into this research, not just what is it looking like in terms of development, but what is that, how does that layer over the best farmland according to that PVR index? So just looking at New York State, just over half of our farmland is considered nationally significant, measured by that PVR value. Probably won't come as a surprise to folks on here where that land is. And critically, it's this highly productive land that's also some of the most important to really sequester carbon and think about the impact for climate resiliency. And with every acre of that land that's converted either to urban or low density, it really challenges our ability to do that and want to be able to kind of have this as a tool, this research to be able to support communities and states to not just identify, but kind of help in decision making. And I think we're seeing that most readily right now in New York and in other states as well, when we're thinking about how to use this spatial data to support New York's really ambitious renewable energy goals, particularly regarding solar, while not compromising the best farmland. I'm sure many of you are involved to various degrees in these conversations about solar arrays in your communities or involved at the state and local levels. And I think the good news is when designed in a way that supports ongoing food production and setting renewable energy systems on farmland, it can be a win-win, and using tools like this to really help to understand where the best farmland is and include that consideration in renewable energy planning, I think is one way we're kind of seeing some more immediate opportunities for its application. So we spend most of the time here today looking at the spatial data. I think that's probably where most of you will be able to jump into the website and dig in and think about the uses in the communities and regions where you work. I did want to mention the other component of Farms Under Threat, which was looking at different policies. And I think this is where, we talk about the threat to farmland, and this gives us a little bit of that hope that I think we all need a little bit more of. And this shows that every single state has really taken action. So we looked at and identified what are the policies and programs that have the most direct impact on slowing that threat down or kind of helped some states to do more over time. And these are the policies that we identified. So this toolbox really includes policies that are purchased agricultural conservation easements, or as we're familiar with and have in New York State, land use planning, agricultural district programs, property tax relief, farmland programs that kind of help new generation of farmers access land. So not just, to making sure that they can utilize that land in the future as agriculture, and the state leasing programs that make state-owned land available for agriculture. So we analyze these policies and summarize them into a broader scorecard. So this is the kind of the visible map of that scorecard. You'll see the leading states are along the coast, where there's been a lot of population growth and high rates of land conversion over decades. And so that's really encouraged states to respond. And again, I won't spend too much time on the policy side, but I think this shows that there are states doing well, and there's a lot of opportunity to learn from policies to address those threats that we see and identify from the different types of changing land use. And nothing like a little competition to encourage changes to policies and programs. So we wanted to see how states mapped out together in terms of their policy response and threat to agricultural land. So what you have here is the amount of threat is shown horizontally, greater to the right, and then the state's level of response is shown vertically, greater to the top. States shown in green have had the policy responses that are really proportional to that threat. So they may or may not have the most programs, but they're kind of meeting the need in the most effective way. And then those in orange and orange and red are have some opportunities to extend and grow. And New York is in orange because we've found that there's a lot of threat and a lot of great work happening. We're kind of just on that cusp of hitting into the green section here. If you look to the orange tile in the middle is where New York sits, but there's still more to do. And I think one of the reasons we rank so highly is from the state Farmland program. That's a state-funded program, Farmland for New Generation, and that did rank #1 in the country when looking at various farmland programs that were one of those policy aspects, and also did well in other areas too. So, we'll be using this, we'll be learning from, I think, other states as well as existing great efforts happening already in New York to try and continue to move the needle on this work. And we'll also be looking ahead, and some of the research for Farms Under Threat is considering future scenarios and how do we take some of this data and start to map out what where do we want to be by 2040 and what do we want it to look like? And so we'll be looking at impacts of development and climate change. We'll also be wanting to kind of project out and show the impacts of choices we make today and what those implications can be in a 20-year period, knowing that there's only so much we can really measure within that time, and that there are going to be longer term implications as well. But how do we think about our decisions today and the impact on the future, and then make sure we're providing tools for planners and policymakers and farmers and others to really make an impact so that we can understand and have some path forward and think about the ripple effects for the future. So I wanted to kind of wrap up here a little bit and save some time for questions if there are any. But based on our research, we are out there both at the state and federal level trying to identify where to go and kind of take these learnings and both make some changes now and how they're going to continue to impact in the future. And I encourage you all to dig in. It's quite a hefty report. I do have it here. It's a nice little nightstand reading if you're interested. You can also visit the website and really go in and dig into the data. We've got both the spatial maps that you can look at different criteria to review, as well as the policy scorecards. You can see how New York ranked in various. And I certainly encourage you to reach out to myself. I also included our research director, Mitch Hunter, his information here as well. So he leads up the Farm Center Threat Research team. So if you do have some specific information or questions to ask of him, and we have more information through our Farmland Information Center that kind of align with some of the policies and programs that are identified in the policy scorecard. And then this National Agricultural Land Network, which is included here, is really the next phase that we're taking of how do we take some of these learnings and create a national network that's states learning from each other, practitioners in other states connecting with each other to really move some change forward at the state and national level. So encourage if folks are interested in that to check that out as well. And that's all I had. And I'll pause if there are questions. And then I know we wanted to pop up the last screen that Nicole had on here too.
Erica. So I have one comment question in the chat. It seems that local sewer and water authorities are eager to expand water and sewer service to rural areas to keep their rates low by increasing their customer base. Often this is accomplished with the help of state and federal money. Once service is provided, development explodes. Seems this needs to be countered in some way as it subsidizes the conversion.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think a good example of how the tools and the information that kind of look at the quality of land, look at where some of the development has happened, could be a valuable resource to kind of better thinking about. And I know there's a lot of kind of mapping together of different needs and resources and kind of efficiencies when thinking about those type of resources to communities. But kind of in the similar example as I mentioned with solar, like how can these maps be used to encourage that type of development to have the least impact on the best farmland? So I'm not sure that answered the question, and I'm also happy to follow up and drill down more specifically the data if folks would like.
Thank you. And I'll share your contact information along with all the presenters in the chat here in just a minute too.
Perfect.
And we don't have any other questions in the chat right now, Nicole.
I will.
Erica, I actually have a question.
Yes.
So if I'm understanding, I guess it's slide 18, you said the competitive factor, and it looks like New Jersey is having a really positive policy response, but also has a high threat. So, and I know you, based off of your bio, you cover New Jersey. So what are some policy things that New Jersey is doing to be a successful actor in this realm that are applicable to New York?
Yeah, I think one thing that certainly stands out is, I mean, they're a state that is without continued intervention is probably projected to have full build out. I mean, a third of their farmland is protected. So I think that's something that there's a high percentage of land that's been protected. They're also, have less farmland than New York State does currently. So I think that's a factor. I'd say the one area where they didn't do as well was that they do have a statewide farmland program. And that was kind of, they ranked second or third, I think, in that. But yeah, and I'd say too, like if you do want to look at New Jersey or look at other states that are kind of on this top tier, the website too, you can kind of pick the state, or you can kind of see how things go and see exactly. There's definitely various layers within each policy area that was identified that kind of supports their piece here. But I think to answer your question, Nicole, is it was part of it was the percentage and kind of the longstanding farmland protection program that they've had.